It started like any other Saturday morning in the small, quiet suburb of Brookdale Heights. The sun hung lazily over the rooftops, casting soft golden rays over freshly cut lawns, the smell of spring lingering in the air. Children were out on bicycles, dogs barked from behind white fences, and somewhere a radio hummed an old soul tune. It was the kind of morning that made people believe the world was peaceful. But peace can be fragile, especially when prejudice is a storm waiting on the horizon. Inside a modest brick house at the end of Willow Street, Jerome Carter, a large-built black man in his mid-40s, sat at the breakfast table with his wife Angela and their teenage son Marcus. Jerome was massive, not just heavy, but broad, powerful, and commanding, the kind of man whose presence filled a room. To the untrained eye, he looked like just another middle-aged man who'd let himself go after years of hard work. But under the layers of muscle and a few earned pounds of age sat something much deeper: discipline, precision, and experience. He was not just any man. He was a retired Delta Force commander, one of the most elite soldiers the U.S. military had ever trained, though no one in the neighborhood knew that. Angela placed a plate of pancakes in front of him and smiled. "You're still eating like you're on deployment, ho," she teased. Jerome chuckled. "Old habit, Angie. You feed a soldier too long, and he never forgets how to eat." Marcus grinned, flipping through his phone. "Are you sure you don't miss it, Dad? The missions? The action?" Jerome's eyes softened as he looked at his son. "I miss the discipline, the brotherhood. But, son, there's no honor in violence. I serve to protect, not to fight for ego. Remember that." Angela leaned over, touching his hand gently. "You've earned your peace, Jerome. Let the world spin without you for once." But the world doesn't always let men like Jerome rest. That morning, Jerome planned to take Marcus to the park. Nothing fancy, just father and son time. Marcus was trying out for the high school basketball team, and Jerome wanted to help him practice. He threw on his gray hoodie, sweatpants, and baseball cap. To any stranger, he looked like just another large black man heading out for a jog. They stopped by the local gas station to grab water bottles. The clerk, a young man with nervous eyes, watched them closely as they entered. Jerome noticed it but ignored it. He'd learnt long ago that some people's fear wasn't his burden to carry. Marcus, however, felt it. He always did. As they approached the counter, Jerome smiled politely. "Just these two, my man." The clerk barely nodded, scanning the bottles, his hand trembling slightly. Marcus glanced at his father, whispering, "Why is he looking at us like that?" Jerome gave a quiet sigh. "Because, son, the world sees what it fears, not what it understands." They left, the air outside lighter than the silence they carried inside. 2 blocks away, someone had called 911. The report was vague. Suspicious black male and teenager casing vehicles, possibly armed. It was the kind of call officers dreaded, and yet too many of them approached with the wrong mindset. Minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled into the park where Jerome and Marcus had begun their warm-up. The officers stepped out. Officer Reed, a tall, pale man with years of frustration carved into his expression, and Officer Collins, younger but equally tense. Their hands rested on their holsters before their minds even processed the scene. Reed's voice boomed across the park. "Hey, you two, stop right there." Marcus froze. Jerome slowly raised his hands, calm but confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Got a call about a suspicious person." "You match the description," Reed said sharply, stepping closer. Jerome's voice stayed even. "We're just practicing basketball. My son's got tryouts." Reed eyed him up and down, his gaze dripping with assumption. "Do you live around here?" "Yes," Jerome replied. "Right down on Willow." "Driver's license," Reed demanded, not asking, ordering. Jerome reached slowly toward his pocket. "It's in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." Collins's hand flinched toward his weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked. Marcus shouted, panicked, he's just getting his ID. But in that instant, the world stopped being calm. Fear moved faster than reason. Reed grabbed Jerome's arm roughly, forcing him around. "Don't resist." Jerome, startled but steady, didn't move. Officer, you're making a mistake. Reed pushed him harder. You think you can tell me how to do my job? Marcus cried, Dad! Jerome's patience thinned, but his discipline held. He didn't raise his voice. Son, stay back. Angela would later say that this moment, the exact second, was when everything changed. A jogger passing by stopped and filmed on her phone. To her, it looked like a large man being pinned by two officers. She didn't know who Jerome Carter was. She only saw another viral moment waiting to happen. Reed shoved Jerome down, pressing into his back. You think you can play tough guy? Jerome's tone dropped, low, controlled, commanding. Officer, I am not your enemy. Take your knee off me before you regret it. The words carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from a man who's been trained to lead soldiers through war zones. But Reed didn't listen. Are you threatening me? In the chaos, Marcus tried to pull his father's arm free. Stop hurting him. Reed turned and shoved Marcus back hard. The boy stumbled and fell, scraping his hand on the pavement. Stay down, kid. That's when Jerome's restraint finally cracked. In one control motion, he shifted his weight, twisted his wrist free, and flipped Reed onto his side with precision so fast the young officer froze. It wasn't rage, it was reflex. Years of training buried under patience, finally breaking the surface. Reed hit the ground with a grunt. Collins drew his weapon. Hands up, don't move. Jerome immediately stepped back, hands raised, eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus, step away. The boy was crying now, shouting. He didn't do anything. By now, sirens echoed in the distance, more units responding. A small crowd gathered, phones out, voices rising. And in the middle of it all, Jerome stood tall, breathing steadily, sweat glistening under the sun, his calm presence clashing against the chaos around him. He knew exactly what was coming next. He'd seen this before, not in suburbia, but in hostile territory, where fear and misunderstanding turned men into enemies. But this time, it wasn't war. It was prejudice, and it wore a badge. When Angela arrived minutes later, running through the crowd, she saw her husband surrounded by flashing lights and raised guns. Jerome, she screamed. Please, that's my husband. Stay back, an officer ordered. Jerome met her eyes, calm, steady, unbroken. Angela could see it, the soldier behind the man. As they handcuff him, Reed nursed his bruised pride more than his bruised ribs. You're under arrest for assaulting an officer. Jerome didn't resist. He simply said, You might want to call your commanding officer before you make another mistake. Reed sneered. Oh, yeah? Why is that? Jerome looked him straight in the eye. Because the Pentagon's not going to like what you're doing to one of their own. Reed froze. What? Jerome didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The weight of his calm silence was louder than any threat. And as the crowd whispered and cameras rolled, the truth, like the storm, was about to break open. The walls of the Brookdale Police Department were as cold as the men who ran it. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, bouncing off the sterile white paint and steel bars. It smelt of old coffee, sweat, and paperwork, the kind of place where stories were buried behind silence and excuses. Jerome Carter sat quietly in an interrogation room, his wrists still cuffed. His gray hoodie was torn at the shoulder where Officer Reed had grabbed him, and a faint scrape marked his cheek from when he'd been pushed against the squad car. But if the officers expected fear, they were disappointed. He didn't slouch, didn't beg, and didn't even look nervous. He sat upright, shoulders squared, calm and alert, the posture of a man who had faced worse than this. Across from him, Reed stood pacing, trying to mask a slight limp from being thrown earlier. Collins sat near the door, typing notes into a laptop, his jaw tight with unease. You think you can assault a police officer and just sit there like nothing happened. Reed barked. Jerome lifted his gaze, his tone low and steady. I didn't assault anyone. I defended myself. You laid hands on me first. You resisted arrest. Reed snapped. I didn't resist. I asked a question. You escalated. Reed's temper flared. What's your tone? Jerome's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in defiance, but in warning. You should be more careful with yours. There was something in the way he said it that unsettled both officers. It wasn't arrogance. It was control. The kind of control that came from training, from discipline. Something neither man could quite place but instinctively respected. The door creaked open. Sergeant Hall, an older black officer with graying temples, stepped in holding a file. "Reed, step outside with me." Reed frowned. "We're in the middle of—" "Now," Hall said firmly. Jerome watched him leave, expression unreadable. Outside the room, Hall shut the door behind him and lowered his voice. "What the hell happened at that park?" Reed's jaw clenched. "We got a suspicious activity call. Guy matched the description. Got physical when I questioned him." "Matched the description," Hall repeated dryly. "Let me guess. Big, black, and breathing." Reed bristled. "You weren't there." He resisted. Hall opened the file he carried, a thick manila folder that looked like it had been pulled from somewhere important. Inside were photos, documents, commendations, and even medals. "Do you know who that man is?" Hall asked. Reed frowned. "Yeah, a guy who thought he could." "No, officer. That man is Jerome Carter, former Delta Force commander, awarded 3 Distinguished Service Crosses, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. You didn't arrest a thug, Reed. You arrested one of this country's most decorated soldiers." Reed's face went pale. "That's not possible. He's just—" Hall snapped the file shut. "Just what? Fat? Black? Dressed in sweatpants?" He leaned in closer. "You made a mistake. A big one. And it's all over social media now. Half the town saw what you did. The other half's watching the video." Reed's stomach twisted. "Someone filmed it." "Of course they did. It's 2025, not 1925, Hall said bitterly. "Your body cam's not going to save you this time. You pinned an unarmed man to the ground in front of his teenage son, and that man just happens to have friends in the Pentagon." Reed's throat went dry. "What are we supposed to do?" Hall sighed, rubbing his forehead. "For starters, pray." Inside the interrogation room, Jerome sat silently as time passed. He didn't speak, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't complain. He simply waited. He'd been in interrogation rooms before, in far more dangerous places, under far greater threats. Patience was a weapon, and Jerome wielded it well. When the door opened again, it wasn't Reed or Collins who entered. It was Captain Sanders, the department head, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a forced smile. "Mr. Carter," Sanders began carefully, "I'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier today." Jerome looked up slowly, his gaze cutting through the man like glass. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Sanders shifted awkwardly. "You have to understand, our officers were responding to a call. They didn't know I was a soldier." Jerome interrupted, his tone even but firm. "Or didn't care that I was a man." Sanders swallowed. "There's no excuse for what happened. I assure you there will be disciplinary action." Jerome leaned forward slightly, his voice low and deliberate. "You think this is about punishment? You think I want your apology? Your officers assaulted me, terrified my son, and humiliated my family. The problem isn't the call, Captain. It's the mindset that made them believe a big black man in a hoodie must be a threat." Sanders looked down, ashamed but silent. Jerome continued. "I've served this country my entire life. I've fought overseas so men like them could wear those badges without fear. But it seems some of them never learned that courage isn't about pulling a trigger, it's about restraint." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, Sanders said softly, "You're free to go, Mr. Carter. We've contacted your family." Jerome nodded, slowly rising. "Good, because the next person I talk to won't be you." Outside the precinct, Angela and Marcus waited anxiously. When Jerome stepped through the doors, Angela ran to him, tears in her eyes. Marcus followed, his face still streaked with anger and confusion. "Are you okay?" Angela whispered, touching his cheek. Jerome gave a small nod. "I'm fine, but this isn't over." Marcus looked up at him, eyes burning. "Dad, why do they always do this?" Why do they look at us like that? Jerome paused, choosing his words carefully. Because fear is powerful, son, and ignorance is its twin. But what they don't understand, what they'll never take from us, is dignity. That's our armor. Angela squeezed his hand. They'll pay for this. Jerome shook his head. Not pay. Learn. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. The headline spread across every major platform. Police tackle unarmed black man in park. Turns out he's a decorated Delta Force veteran. Clips flooded the internet. Jerome's calm voice, Reed's aggression, and Marcus's cries. News anchors debated, politicians tweeted, and protesters gathered outside the Brookdale Police Department. Inside the chaos, Reed's world began to crumble. He was suspended pending investigation. The department was under scrutiny, and the mayor was demanding answers. But Jerome didn't seek revenge. He sought truth. He stood at a podium days later, at a press conference organized by the town council. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded the stand. His presence was calm, but his words carried fire. I didn't come here to shame anyone, he began. I came to remind everyone what service means. I've led soldiers of every race, every color, and every faith into places most people wouldn't survive. We never asked what color a man's skin was when bullets were flying. We only cared about whether he stood beside us when it mattered. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. But here, at home, I've seen something far more dangerous than any enemy I ever faced. Fear of our own citizens. That's what's killing this country. Fear dressed as authority. Power without empathy. You cannot protect a community you're afraid of. The room fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Jerome's voice softened. I'm not your enemy. My son's not your threat. We are your neighbors. We are Americans. And until that truth is seen, not just spoken, we'll keep living the same story over and over again. When he stepped down, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was reverent. People didn't cheer. They stood in quiet respect. Later that night, at home, Jerome sat on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. Marcus came out, sitting beside him. Dad. Yeah. I saw that video again. You looked different, strong, like you weren't scared at all. Jerome smiled faintly. You know the first rule of combat. Marcus shook his head. Never let fear lead. It can ride in the back seat, but it doesn't get to drive. Marcus leaned against his father's arm. You think they'll change? The cops. Jerome sighed. Maybe not all at once. But someone out there heard me today, and maybe they'll think twice the next time they see a man like me and reach for their gun instead of their judgment. Angela appeared in the doorway, her voice soft. You know, Jerome, you might have just started something bigger than you think. Jerome looked out at the stars. I didn't start it, Angie. I just reminded them we've always been here. But while the world began to shift, Reed's anger only grew. At home, sitting in the dark, he replayed the moment over and over, the fall, the humiliation, the look in Jerome's eyes. He'd never felt so powerless. He poured another drink, muttering to himself. He made me look weak in front of everyone. On the wall behind him, a news broadcast flickered, Jerome's face filling the screen, his words echoing. Fear dressed as authority. Power without empathy. Reed clenched his fist. We'll see how strong you really are, soldier. Because some lessons aren't learnt, they're resisted. And some men can't stand to face the mirror of their own prejudice. The storm wasn't over yet. It was only gathering strength. The days after Jerome's speech were a blur of interviews, protests, and news segments. His calm voice had become the center of a national conversation, a conversation about power, fear, and the quiet courage of those who refuse to be broken. Across the country, millions watched the video of the park incident. It wasn't just another viral moment. It was a mirror held up to America's conscience. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was a threat to the fragile image of control they'd always believed in. And for Officer Reed, it was humiliation he couldn't live with. He had become the face of everything wrong with the department. He'd been suspended, publicly shamed, and quietly abandoned by his peers. Reporters camped outside his house, neighbors whispered when he passed, and even Collins, his partner, stopped returning his calls. But anger has a way of poisoning a man who refuses to face the truth. And Reed's anger was no longer about justice or pride. It was personal. It was a Thursday evening when the storm finally broke. Jerome had just returned home from a community meeting, exhausted but content. He'd spent the day speaking with local youth, helping build bridges between black teens and the police department. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same department that once pinned him to the ground was now asking for his advice. Angela was cooking dinner in the kitchen, humming quietly. Marcus sat on the couch, reading. The house smelled like roasted chicken and cornbread, the smell of peace, of home. Jerome smiled, feeling the kind of calm he'd fought years to earn. But peace, it seemed, was still not ready to let him rest. Headlights flashed across the living room window. A car door slammed. Then another. Jerome frowned, his instincts kicking in. He moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. A police cruiser sat across the street, engine running. But there was something off. No lights, no radio chatter. Just silence. Angela called out from the kitchen. "Everything okay, honey?" Jerome didn't answer. His body went still, every sense sharpened. "Marcus, go upstairs," he said quietly. The boy looked up, confused. "What's wrong?" "Go," Jerome repeated, firmer now. Marcus obeyed, heading up the stairs. Jerome stepped toward the door, opening it just slightly. "Who's out there?" From the shadows, a voice replied, slurred, angry. "You think you're a hero, ho?" Jerome's jaw tightened. "Reed." The officer stepped forward, his uniform wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't even on duty. A half-empty whiskey bottle glinted in his hand. "You ruined me," Reed growled. "You and your perfect speech. You made me a joke." Jerome didn't move. "You did that yourself, son. Go home." Reed laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me because you wore a uniform? You think anyone cares? You're just another angry black man pretending to be noble." Jerome's tone stayed calm, but there was steel in it. "Put the bottle down before you make another mistake." Reed's hand trembled. He dropped the bottle, but when it shattered, his other hand revealed a gun. Angela screamed from inside. Jerome didn't flinch. His voice dropped into that same command tone that had led men through war zones. "Reed, you point that weapon at my family, and I will stop you." Reed raised the gun, his lip trembling. "You don't tell me what to do." The front door burst open. Marcus had run downstairs despite his father's warning. "Dad!" he cried. In that split second, Reed's gun shifted, not at Jerome, but toward Marcus. And that's when everything slowed down. Jerome's instincts took over. In one motion, he lunged forward, tackling Reed to the ground. The gun went off, the sound shattering the quiet night, echoing through the neighborhood. Angela screamed. Marcus froze at the top of the stairs. Jerome pinned Reed to the ground, wrenching the gun away with practiced precision. His weight bore down like a mountain. "You're done," he said through clenched teeth. Reed struggled, gasping. You're going to kill me." Jerome's voice came out low, controlled. "If I wanted to kill you, Reed, you'd already be gone." He pressed the weapon aside, unloaded it, and set it on the ground out of reach. Then he stood, breathing hard, staring down at the man who'd tried to destroy him. Reed looked up, eyes wet with fear, not of Jerome, but of himself. "Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you?" Jerome interrupted softly, "Because I fought enough wars, and none of them made me whole." Within minutes, sirens filled the street. Collins arrived first, his face pale when he saw who was standing in the yard. "Jesus, Reed, what have you done?" Jerome handed over the unloaded gun calmly. "You might want to call an ambulance. He's hurt, but not dead." Collins looked at him, eyes filled with something new. Not pity, not superiority, but respect. "You saved his life," he whispered. Jerome nodded, even when he didn't deserve it. The following days turned Brookdale upside down. Reed was arrested and charged with armed assault and unlawful use of firearm. The department issued another public statement, but this time the tone was different. They didn't call it a misunderstanding. They called it what it was, an act of violence rooted in hate and shame. For Jerome and his family, the ordeal had left deep scars, but it had also sparked something larger, a movement. People began writing to him, visiting his home, and thanking him for his composure, his strength, and his message. News networks called him a hero, but Jerome refused the title. "I'm not a hero," he told one reporter. "I'm just a man who refused to lose his humanity." 1 week later, Jerome was invited to speak at the Brookdale Civic Center, the same hall where the mayor and city officials gathered to announce the launch of a new community accountability program aimed at retraining officers in cultural sensitivity, de-escalation, and civilian respect. The hall was packed. Cameras rolled. The town was silent as Jerome took the stage. He stood for a long moment, looking out at the crowd, not as a victim, but as a man who had carried both pain and pride with grace. He began slowly, his deep voice steady. "When I was a soldier," he said, "we were trained to see threats before they saw us. But here, at home, I've realized something. The greatest threat we face isn't out there. It's in here." He tapped his chest. "In our hearts. In the way we see each other." He paused. "I've seen men lose their lives overseas trying to defend a flag they barely understood. And I've seen men here lose their souls trying to defend pride they never owned. We've got to stop letting fear make our decisions." He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing briefly on Marcus in the front row, then on Angela beside him. "My son asked me if the police will ever change. I told him, not unless we change first. Not unless we start seeing the people behind the uniforms and the humanity behind the skin." The room was quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. Jerome smiled faintly. "They called me a threat because I was big, because I was black. They saw my size, not my story. But I'm not angry, because anger only builds walls. I'm here to build bridges." He stepped back from the podium. "And I'll build them one person at a time if I have to." The applause started softly, then grew, a slow, rising wave of emotion. Later that night, Jerome stood outside the hall under the soft glow of the streetlights. Marcus ran up beside him, his face bright. "Dad, you did it," he said. "Everyone was cheering for you." Jerome smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, son, we did it. You, your mother, everyone who stood by us. That's what makes us strong, not the fight, but the faith." Angela joined them, slipping her hand into his. "You really think things will change?" Jerome looked up at the stars, the same stars he'd once stared at from deserts and jungles far from home. "Change doesn't come fast, Angie, but it comes, one truth at a time." Marcus looked at him, eyes wide with admiration. "I want to be like you someday, Dad." Jerome chuckled softly. "No, son, be better. Be the kind of man who never has to fight to be seen." As they walked home together, the night felt lighter, the air warmer. Across the street, porch lights flickered on. Neighbors who once looked at Jerome with suspicion now waved. Some even called out his name. And though he knew prejudice wouldn't vanish overnight, he also knew something powerful had shifted, in the town, in the hearts of the people, and perhaps in himself. Jerome Carter wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a symbol of restraint, of dignity, of what real strength looks like when the world tries to strip it away. He had proven one truth that no badge or title could deny, that a man's worth isn't measured by his size, his color, or the fear he inspires, but by the peace he chooses to create in the face of chaos.